Hello, boys and girls. This is your old pal Spum Donor, and today we get to talk about the leaked episode of the Ren and Stimpy reboot. I'll try to keep this short, but there's a lot to talk about. First of all, the opening theme music. I guess they probably didn't want to pay royalties to John Kay, but they didn't even re-record it like they did on that You Idiot CD release from the early 90s. They just composed this new theme that sounds like, I don't know, Ren and Stimpy as Katamari Damacy music. It's a little off-putting. It doesn't bode well. And then the next thing that doesn't bode well is that title card, which doesn't even credit the artists, not even the writers, because I guess that would make it too conspicuous that this is a writer cartoon. The Ren and Stimpy reboot is a writer cartoon. And it's good that this show exists, actually, for educational purposes. Because here we have Ren and Stimpy, the cartoon which, along with Bakshi's Mighty Mouse, finally gave TV cartoons back to cartoonists after 20 or so years, and now it's a writer's cartoon. And what is a writer cartoon? A writer cartoon is a cartoon written by non-cartoonists. That's basically all it is, and you can tell the difference. It's really obvious. Am I crazy, or does the show look more like adult party cartoon than it does the Spumco or Games versions? Because they got Carbuncle to work on it, and obviously it's not all the same people who worked on the original or even on adult party cartoon, which was also Carbuncle. They've got some newer talent, and Bob Jakes directed the animation, just like he did on all the classic Ren and Stimpies, but this iteration of it is an incredibly conservative version by comparison, where the acting is really restrained and the big expressions, they kind of just seem copied from the old series. Like, there's no memorable or standout drawings or poses or expressions or anything. It kind of looks like they wanted to have the constructed look of Ren and Stimpy from the first season, or even from Adult Party Cartoon, rather than that flat but stylized look in some of the later Games cartoons. But the finished product itself also just kind of looks flat and lifeless, because it feels like the artists were just struggling to keep up with making sure that Ren and Stimpy stayed on model. And there are some weird drawings of Ren in this. Ren is notoriously hard to draw. I don't know why they keep drawing him with like a flappy, overhanging upper lip, but it makes him look like Chuck Jones's Grinch or something. And it seems like a lot of the scenes are animated on twos. Like, there's about 12 drawings a second, so it's smooth, but it's also totally lifeless because the poses are so watered down and the expressions. And you can't even blame the artists. I don't blame any of them. You can tell they're really talented, but you can tell that they were all kept on a real tight leash. This is not a SpongeBob situation where artists are allowed to contribute gags or visual ideas during the storyboarding process. It's a writer cartoon. The artists are all subordinate to an awful writer's room full of hacks, and we'll get to them. Billy West's Stimpy is still kind of passable, but Ren sounds tired. Billy West is old, and he's still allowed to voice a Mexican Chihuahua because woke cancellation is entirely selective. But him doing Ren, it sounds like Julie Kavner doing Marge. Like, their poor old vocal cords just can't take this abuse anymore. So 2 minutes in, you have the first use of the old production music cues, and hey, it's just like the old days. Ren and Stimpy member berries. They're using the old music. What does Aw Hell No open with? It opens with Stimpy making gross treats for Ren, and then a little after that, when they die, Ren is happy that Stimpy is gone when he's in hell. This is the Games version of their relationship. It's shallow, and Ren hates Stimpy, and there's no love between them. Like, the love is completely one way. Plus, there's all these gags later on in the episode where Ren is getting hurt and Stimpy isn't, and it's just like the old Games formula of piling the abuse on Ren because he has to be punished because the spirit of John Kay dwells within him. The point when I realized what kind of show this was probably when, after they've died and Ren is in hell, he's looking at the directory sign of hell, and it's showing all the different parts of hell, and one of them is the 405 freeway. This is hack LA comedy writer crap. Jokes about the 405 freeway is like their secret handshake. Regular people don't care about these inside jokes about living in Los Angeles. There's incidental characters in line for hell, of course. Remember the booger red lummox from Lair of the Lummox? Do you remember? Remember him? The human characters in the line for hell and the human characters in the other cartoon, they look really bad. You know how, like, on Animaniacs, they would just have generic cartoony humans, but they weren't very cartoony. They were just kind of low-effort cartoony humans. That's a lot what the human characters are like on this version of Ren and Stimpy. Oh, more hack comedy writer stuff. Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is a devil in hell. Speaking of Animaniacs, the Animaniacs reboot had Putin jokes. The Ren and Stimpy reboot has Putin jokes. They could have been written by the exact same people. These hack comedy writers have no point of view. They're all the same. They embody the hackery of whatever era they exist in. They're like locusts. They move from one show to the next. They're already thinking about their next job. And if you want another example of that happening to another beloved old show, look at the Mystery Science Theater reboot and the kind of jokes that are on that compared to the point of view and the integrity of the personality on the original show. LA hack comedy writers, they're a dime a dozen, and they're working on the Ren and Stimpy reboot. And that 405 joke and the Putin joke, that's followed up by a joke about reading people your screenplay. And in the Squatters cartoon that comes after this one, there's a joke about working for exposure. Do they understand that there's life outside of LA? This is total myopia. At the point when Ren starts talking to the devil, it really sank in for me just how talky this new version is going to be, because it's mostly just been a lot of medium shots of one character talking to another, because writer cartoons can't help defaulting to that. They're word thinkers. They don't think visually, and they don't want to play second fiddle to the visual artists. They have proprietary egos. When the devil says, "Last week I taught Sisyphus to whistle. He's just happy to have a job." And then later on, "I treated you like I would have treated my own son if he hadn't gone to art school." These are cartoon writer jokes for writer cartoons. It's verbal diarrhea. There's more of that in the Squatters cartoon when the neighbor shows up and blathers about his obnoxious hobbies, the sailor neighbor. And then the woman in Ren and Stimpy's house blathers back. It's just gab, 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 gab. And these are the kind of wordy jokes that you would hear in Futurama, that you would hear in Family Guy, that you would hear in Star Trek Lower Decks, which incidentally is one of the cartoons that the writers on this version of Ren and Stimpy worked on. So yeah, that's what we've got here. And what job does a director have on a show like this? Basically, they're just timing the movements and the lines to make sure that it's all done in 22 minutes. The direction of this show, it's like watching traffic being directed. There's no sense of artistic focus happening. There's no storytelling. And again, I'm not blaming the directors or the animators. Like this, they're stuck working with these scripts. You're just listening to a writer's room session with visual aids. And honestly, that's what a lot of the games Ren and Stimpy cartoons were. But again, this is educational, because at least with the games Ren and Stimpy's, you could see what cartoons looked like when it was cartoonists coming up with gags. You can really see the absence of direction at the climax of the Aw Hell No episode when Ren doesn't want to torture Stimpy, because that should be a dramatic moment, right? But it just kind of happens. And games cartoons had a problem with this too, but they did want you to go on a journey sometimes. Like in cartoons like, everybody hates this one, but Jerry the Belly Button Elf, you could tell sometimes they felt like they had an obligation based on the show's reputation to blow your mind, to really freak you out, if nothing else. And I don't think we're getting that with this show. They're just gag cartoons, and they're very bland. And you know how even in the games seasons, even though a lot of the cartoons were just gag cartoons, they also had directors, and you could tell the drawings in a Bob Camp directed one from a Bill Ray directed one from a Chris Riccardi directed one. Like, you could actually see those artists' styles being reflected in the cartoons they directed. Those were real cartoons. This new Ren and Stimpy is just like a LA comedy writer joke delivery system, like most so-called adult cartoons coming out of Hollywood. About halfway through the Squatters episode, I was reminded that another giveaway that this show is a writer cartoon is that everything is paced at about the same speed, like regardless of what's happening in the scene. That was the problem with what should have been the emotional climax of Aw Hell No, when Ren doesn't want to torture Stimpy. Like, at that point, you would expect there to be a dramatic beat, things slow down, you see Ren's anguish, he doesn't want to do it. But everything just kind of proceeds at about the same pace as everything else. So you just feel like you're watching a checklist of jokes being ticked off. And reading the credits for this show was fascinating because it's been impossible to get any information about who's actually been working on the series, unless like somebody who personally worked on it tweeted about it. This was never a good sign. But we already knew this was a troubled production. We knew that at first they brought back Bob Camp, Jim Gomez, Bill Ray, but they all bailed. There's a animator named Richard Dannies who tweeted or posted on his Facebook page about this, and I'll read that to you now. Richard Dannies posted this. From what I understand, Bob Camp and a number of original Spumco crew artists were involved with the reboot early on, but a lot of them quit in frustration during the production. I've been told the show is very writer-driven, and a lot of the gags and ideas that cartoonists brought to the table were rejected by the show writers. And also, Bob Camp posted this on his Facebook. This might be a recent post, I'm not sure, but among other comments, he stated, I was involved at the beginning and discovered that try as I might, I couldn't do what I wanted to do, so I went back to work for the Sponge. Later in that same comment, he says, hey, if you want funny cartoons, check out the Patrick Star Show. I've been working on that for 2 years. I'm very happy. And yeah, obviously, SpongeBob is a cartoon made by cartoonists, and this new version of Ren and Stimpy is not. This is the clearest possible demonstration of how it's not about the IP, it's not about the characters, it's about the artists and who is in charge, how is it being produced, where is the propriety. So the writers for the show, I don't want to pick on them particularly because I obviously don't like them, but I'm not going to single any of them out personally. Well, except for one, because there's a staff of 7 people who are just credited as staff writers. Like, they don't even get credited individually in the opening titles of the cartoons. There's one person who wrote the teleplay, Ren and Stimpy cartoons with teleplays. That's where we're at. Her name is Jenny Yaffe. She's the first executive producer credited when the show's credits run. And wow, I can't believe this executive producer / teleplay writer didn't let artists have more creative input. There is a credit for additional writing by Kelly Armstrong, who is the only cartoonist out of those 9 people credited as writers. She runs Carbuncle with Bob Jakes, and she animated on the original show, an adult party cartoon, and that's all she gets. And I think she only got that additional writing credit because she's credited with the storyboards on the Aw Hell No cartoon. So obviously, by doing the storyboards, she was able to sneak in 1 or 2 cartoonist jokes, and then she got herself an additional writing credit. But that's the extent of it. That's the little bone that they threw to an actual cartoonist on this version. I had to look up each of these other writers individually because nobody has even cared enough to add the credits to the IMDb page for this turkey. And there's not a single cartoonist among them, which is what you want for a reboot of a show which, along with Bakshi's Mighty Mouse, finally put artists back in charge of cartoons. A couple of them wrote for Star Trek Lower Decks and Big Mouth, writer cartoons for stoners. I understand the argument that you don't necessarily need to have the people who made the old shows back on the new version, but they didn't give the show to people who watched Ren and Stimpy as kids and then decided to become cartoonists. They just treated this like a disposable Comedy Central animated sitcom, and they gave it to hack comedy writers, like it's that animated sitcom about the royal family or something like that. 7 out of the 9 writers on the show are women. I'm not saying women can't be funny, but was it decided that the majority of writers on this version needed to be women as some kind of reparation for John Kay being a groomer? I noticed Robin Bird is the production coordinator. I can't imagine she had fun working on this. Was that just like a semi-no-show job that they gave her after she started that petition to get the reboot canceled? That's just my speculation, but who knows? Anyways, what can you say? A lot of people are going to feel obligated to defend this and say, well, at least it's better than Adult Party Cartoon, but, at least, even if you hate it, Adult Party Cartoon was something that John Kay put his heart and soul into, or at least some of those cartoons. He has a black heart and a mean and twisted soul, but that series wasn't just product to him. I mean, he made Fire Dogs 2 because he wanted to tell a story about how crazy it is being friends with Ralph Bakshi. He made Ren Seeks Help because he was expressing something about his own screwed upness. The 2 cartoons in this leaked episode of Ren and Stimpy, they're just disposable product, totally disposable television product intended to fill time between commercials. And it's bland and it's lame, and it doesn't seem like the people who wrote it care about it, and I don't expect it to last. But, maybe we can learn some things from it. So, thanks for listening to my scattershot thoughts on this. Take care. Bye.